A few years ago, my girlfriend and I were staying at my grandparents' house for a couple of days to help them prepare for our Thanksgiving family gathering. My great-grandmother passed away in the house years after my great-grandfather had passed. She wanted to go home. So, when the time came, we all said our goodbyes. The house had been active since then. My grandparents share the stories of hearing and smelling the coffee being made at the time my great-grandmother would wake up at 5 a.m. They hear people walking through the house while they're in bed, and my grandmother even cried to me about wanting to move out, but my grandfather didn't want to. She seems okay now, but I won't ever forget seeing so much fear inside her. My girlfriend avoids paranormal discussions at all cost. She knew stories about the house and just told me that if she got up to use the bathroom at night, she wanted me to stay awake while she went. Upon going to bed, I fell asleep pretty easily, but as soon as I did, she was screaming at me. "Stop it! That's not funny, we're leaving!" I jolted awake and was trying to calm her. It was a while until she was convinced that I wasn't trying to scare her. She told me she felt 2 fingers walk up her back, grab the collar on the back of her shirt, and jerk it down. I barely convinced her to ride out the night, and even then I had to stay awake and hug her, or shield her from behind until she fell asleep, with the covers over her head. The next night we went out, late, to grab Chinese. Upon returning, my girlfriend went straight to the kitchen and started plating the food. Our grandparents were asleep long before we left. I went to the living room and sat in the PC chair about to turn it on. Out of dead silence, I hear a loud whistling. A tune that was so well rehearsed, a song 10 feet beside me, directly in front of the hutch. My head jerked in the direction where I should have seen someone standing. I couldn't even blink. I feel like the thing should have felt caught and stopped whistling immediately. But no, it goes on for a full 10 seconds while I'm frozen in fear and looking for a face, a source, anything. It was so human, so raw sounding. As soon as it stopped, I darted for the kitchen and asked my girlfriend out of desperation if she was whistling. She was confused and amazed by the random question, for a moment anyway, and then fear washed over her, because she knew what I was about to say. We ended up leaving that night and returning in the morning to help with Thanksgiving dinner. My girlfriend wouldn't be able to close an eye if we hadn't. We told our grandparents the next day about what happened. They looked at each other and laughed in amusement, saying it was my great-grandfather, and that he was always a whistler. My grandmother reminded me of a time when I was younger and playing with a neighbour's girl who also stayed with her grandparents over the summer. When I came home, my grandmother asked if I had stopped in at all that day, and I said no, and asked why. She said she'd heard me walking around the house whistling. The house is one big circle with 2 entrances in the kitchen, and she was looking for me to see if I was eating with the neighbouring girl and her grandparents or them. I was a kid and didn't think much of it, but since my own experience, I'm uncomfortable in the house. The whistling seems to be associated with my presence. I'm not so much bothered by the actual experience, but the fact that it has forced me to believe in something after death. I've had other experiences, but nothing so bold, so close, and so undeniable. Every time I'm at their house, I look at the spot and listen intentfully. I wish I knew the song, but I'm too scared to pay it any thought. I'm 19 now, but from the age of 7 to 12, we lived in a house in Alabama. It was a nice neighborhood. We had some woods behind our house, but you could see through them to another neighborhood sort of far away. This part does matter. I can't remember them in order, but I do remember a lot of experiences. My family also experienced it too, and we had so much documentation of things happening that we almost had some paranormal people come out, but we moved out abruptly. The spirit, ghost, whatever you want to say, that lived in the house wasn't just a singular one. There were numerous. From the moment we moved into the house, everyone had a feeling that something was off and very eerie. When we bought the house, it was supposed to be $200K plus, but the owner wanted it gone and refused to walk the house with us and sold it for about $130K. Here are some of the stories. I was asleep and above my bed, and there was a huge rectangular window that had a street lamp outside it, and the light would shine in, and you could see the reflections on the walls. As I was lying there, I saw a man with a huge top hat walking across my room in the shadows. It stopped in the corner, and I waited for a few minutes terrified, and decided I would see if it was someone outside so that I could tell my dad. I got up and looked out the window, and there was nothing there. When I looked back at the wall, nothing was there. Numerous times I woke up and would see white orbs floating around the room. There was a time my friends spent the night and went home at 4 a.m. because the door to my room faced our solarium, and inside the solarium she saw an old man sitting in our chair rocking. She later saw a dark shadow walk down our hallway. My brother's friend came over during the day, and my brother was showing him around. For some bizarre reason, they stopped in my room and opened the closet door. Both of them saw a toddler girl. She was bloody and crying, and disappeared right in front of their eyes. He never came back. This was the time I was home alone. My brother is my step, but anyway, his dad has been passed for years at this point. So he has a huge box including his dad's things. One of those things being a jack-in-the-box, way up in the closet, no way of falling. I was sitting in my living room watching a movie and playing with Barbies. I had to go to the bathroom, so walking past my brother's room, I heard something fall. I stopped, scared. I'm sure 3 to 5 minutes passed, because I was paralyzed with fear, when the jack-in-the-box started winding up and going off. I ran into my room, locked myself in there and called my parents, and didn't leave the room for 6 hours until they got home. There was another time, when at around 3 in the morning, my parents were doing a house project and remodeling their room and adding a door. So we were all outside. I was playing in the backyard on the tire swing facing the woods, and I remember seeing 2 big eyes in the woods. Huge. So I ran to my dad and showed him. Compared to my dad, the eyes were 7 to 8 feet off the ground. He called my brother over there and asked if he saw it, and he did. He ran inside and hid. I watched my dad, and my dad moved and made certain stances to see if their eyes would follow, and they did. We walked inside, and my dad and I walked back out a few hours later, and the eyes were gone. There was this time we had a babysitter, and we were asleep in our rooms while she was in my parents' room watching TV. She was a good friend of ours. She fell asleep and woke up to me waking her up in bed and tugging on her, and she got up. and I walked into my parents' bathroom while she followed and I disappeared. She freaked out and ran to my room, and I was asleep in bed. From my parents' bed, you could see down the hallway and see the door to my room, the bathroom, and my brother's room. And so my dad was up at around 2, watching a movie, when he saw a figure pop out from my door, shining into the hallway. He looked at it thinking it was me, and it disappeared. This continued back and forth for 20 minutes, and he got up once again, and I was asleep. My dad saw the old man from the bathroom on our back porch, so he ran outside, and nothing was there. This happened numerous times. We would often hear things at night, so one night we set up a recorder and a camera in the living room. During the night it ran, and when we woke up, there were a few shadow figures in the hallway, walking back and forth, but nothing on camera. But the recorder, you can hear a loud organ playing with a flute. It went on for hours. When it stopped, you just heard a shrill scream. We didn't own an organ, let alone a piano. My stepmom used to cut hair in our house and had her own little salon. So while cutting my brother's hair, we all kind of were hanging out with the radio on when it shoots up to full blast. We all kind of stopped, and my stepmom piped up, saying to turn it back down or whatever, and the volume went back to the normal sound. It happened once or twice, but that was it. Numerous things would fly and hit you out of nowhere. You would also hear people when you were home alone. Cabinets shutting, the front door slamming. There was never anyone there. Pets would disappear, never to be found. Things like hamsters with no way of getting out. We once found a scorpion, and we put a thick glass bottle over it and left it there for 3 to 4 hours. When we got back home, the glass bottle was right still, but the scorpion was gone. We kept all our dogs outside, but we had a mini chihuahua who was sick, so we kept her inside for the day. My parents were at work, so my brother and I were the first to arrive home. She was mangled, and dead obviously, in our living room. No explanation. There was once when we took down the mirror to my parents' bathroom, and behind it, a card fell out talking about Christianity. We helped carry the mirror and a few other things out of the bathroom, and left the card on the counter. When we walked back, it wasn't there, but later appeared under our hot tub in the solarium. I do know that the man I saw in my room with the top hat has followed me to 4 different houses and currently plays with my 3-month-old baby while she's asleep. I catch it on the video's baby monitor sometimes. I hope you enjoyed my experiences. When it comes to the paranormal, I've always seen things my whole life, but brushed it off as just my imagination. Aside from the noise in the woods, that was all too real. My dad suddenly died when I was 13, a month before I had a dream he would die, and how he would die. It all happened in that same way. Then he came and visited me a few times. I decided I wanted answers, and from that point forward, I dove off into the deep end, so to speak. I didn't hunt, I investigated. I was and still am very skeptical of everything, even what I witnessed myself. So now for the story of what my friends and I witnessed when we were 23/24. My friends and I worked together on the beach at a local bar, and after we closed, we would go to the local sports park to walk the trails to do cardio workouts. It was typically around 2 in the morning when we would get to the park, and would always park by the kids' fishing pond. The reason we did this is because it's well lit, close to the trailhead, and the local police liked to do their paperwork there, so we knew that our car would be safe. We had always heard rumours that the park was haunted, which worked out well for me and my friend Scott, because we loved to investigate rumoured hauntings and do our best to disprove them. Colby was on the side of the fence, where that stuff just wasn't real. But that night made us all question reality. I parked the car in our usual spot. We got out and said hello to the officer there, stretched, and started on our way. I was a little ahead of my friends. I noticed right off to my right on the trail, the dark figure of a man walked onto the trail in front of me, right in the darkest area. I stopped and called back to my friends. To do the same. They asked me what was wrong, and I told them I'd just seen someone walk from behind the maintenance shed and into the dark part of the trail. I stayed still and had them move up and down the trail to see if I had possibly just seen their shadows. The three of us are not small people. All of us are over 6 foot tall and in pretty good shape. But we weren't stupid either, so I called out to see if anyone would answer, to no avail. We slowly start to move forwards down the trail, when all three of us suddenly get the feeling we should stop. Just as soon as we do right in the middle of the trail, about 6 feet off the ground, seemingly an average-built man's shadow, but with 2 glowing red eyes staring at us. I looked at the others if they saw the same thing, to which they both exclaimed that they indeed saw the 2 eyes ahead of us. I decide to step forward and start asking questions. As soon as I start to close the gap even slightly, whatever this thing is starts pacing back and forth quickly across the trail, seemingly getting agitated. So I step back and the pacing slows, but it's still moving back and forth, never breaking eye contact. My friend Scott then comes up beside me with Colby and asks, "What are you?" No longer had the words left his mouth when it gets bigger, and we go from just seeing eyes to seeing a massive shape in front of us with the glowing eyes. From what at first I would have said was average built, was now a Hulk. At that point, Colby pulls us both back and says, "Whatever this is, it isn't messing around, guys. Back up." Now this massive form is pacing quickly again back and forth. So me being me, I start asking more questions and it will never answer me. The only answer I ever got will send me running. It continues its pacing when Scott and Colby both ask, "Wait, are we maybe 10 feet away? Shouldn't we be hearing footsteps?" It hits me that the entire time we haven't heard a single noise from the time I saw this thing come out the bushes until now. So I go, "In Jesus' name, tell us what you are." Suddenly, the face, as best I can describe, is this huge white face with solid black voids for eyes, rushes forwards towards the thing. Its teeth are gnashing and biting, and all of a sudden I feel like I got thumped in the chest. I stagger backwards. I look at my friends and they are standing there with their mouths wide open. I look back and it looks bigger now. I say a few choice words when it does it again. Huge white face coming at me. I scream until we run as hard as we can back to the head of the trail. I look back and will later confirm with both my friends that as we're running away, this thing was right behind us, flashing white with red eyes chasing us down. I get back to the car, and down the trail we see a couple of streetlights blink, but we don't see the entity again. We went back a couple of times, but have yet to run in it again. And to be honest, I'm very thankful we haven't. That will be one night I will never forget, and my friends became true believers. This story started back in 2016. I was around 18 at the time. I loved watching ghost hunter shows. I'd been listening to creepy stories for a couple of years already, and started to watch horror movies, even though I ended up being scared for quite some time after them. But I was so interested and fascinated by this topic, I just couldn't let it go. I also believed in ghosts, spirits, entities, whatever you want to call them. There is no particular reason for why I do, and I hadn't had any encounters as a child. I'm sure I don't even have imaginary friends, but still. And even though I am a very empathetic person, I've never felt ghosts or anything like that, so I'm not meant to be a medium. But enough of me. Let's get on to the story. One night I laid in bed and watched some YouTube videos as usual. Suddenly, I felt a sensation in my room. You should know my bedroom is not very big, so if someone had entered it, I definitely would have noticed. I looked up from my computer and in the direction of where I felt the sensation. It was about 2.5 meters away from me, besides the door, directly in front of my bookshelf. If you could see my room, I could point to the exact spot from where I got that feeling from. But there was nothing, just air. I didn't see a shadow, a light, or anything. So I tried to shrug it off as my weird mind going off on its own again. But a couple of nights later I felt it once more. It was like someone was staring at me, motionless, just standing there watching me. Every time I felt this entity, I looked at the same spot. It was always in the exact same position, right in front of the bookshelf. The thing didn't move. It didn't do anything but watch me, or at least be in the room with me. And even though it didn't do anything, I felt so uneasy. In the beginning, the entity only came a couple of nights a month, but it soon came more often. It visited more and more days in a row. Sometimes it would be there for a whole week. There was no particular time when it came or when it left. Usually it was here when it was dark, and I laid in bed, and it didn't leave until I was asleep. It was never here when the sun was up, only when I was alone at night. I know this must sound like I was just paranoid and afraid of the dark, but I never had felt anything like that in my life. Yes, I did watch scary videos and movies, but I did that for years already. So why had something like that never happened to me before? Our house could not have been the reason why he came. My parents built it themselves, so there's no history to it, and there's no cemetery or anything like it underneath. I had also thought about the possibility of my grandparents visiting, but I figured I wouldn't feel so uneasy if it were them. I felt my grandfather before, but this was different. After some time of feeling it in my bedroom, I started to see a picture in my head whenever the entity was with me. I know this must sound weird, but I think in some way it told me what it looked like. Whenever it was here, I felt like it was a young male, between 30 and 35, very tall, slim, with dark hair and dark eyes. And for some reason, I felt like he was from the early 19th century. Maybe a soldier from a war, I'm not sure, because it seemed like he was wearing a uniform. Again, I've never seen a shadow or anything like that, but in my head, It seems like this is what he looked like. And he always hunched over a bit. Not like he was picking something up, more like he was sad and tired, perhaps even hurt. One night I'd had enough. I was so scared of him and was constantly thinking what he could possibly want from me. I wished that I could hear something, that he would say something to me, so that I could at least know what he wanted. So I decided to walk up to him the next time I felt him. A short time after, I felt him in my room again, the same spot as usual. So I stood up, walked towards him, and stopped right in front of him. I reached out my hand and said, "If you want to hurt me, this is your opportunity." I stood there with my hand reached out, and the back of my hand facing him, ready for him to touch or even hurt me. I waited. He did nothing. It was quiet, and we stood in front of each other just coexisting. I was very happy with the result. I smiled, thanked him, and got back to bed. I still felt him in my room, but I felt a little less uneasy that night. A couple of months later, in 2017 during the summer, my cousin and I spontaneously decided to go on a trip for 2 days. We went to a lake and stayed over at a small guest house. I was honestly a little happy to get away from my nightly visitor. Yes, that is what it had come to. I was so happy to be away because I was sure the ghost wouldn't follow me, or at least I'd hope not. In that one night that we stayed in the guest house, I had a dream. There was a tall, black figure just standing there looking at me. I couldn't see his face, just the outline of his shadow. I was 100% sure that it was the ghost from my room. But this time he had something with him. Not a person. It was big. A really big wolf. Not a dog. A wolf. It stood beside the ghost, like a pet dog stands by his owner. The wolf was so tall, it reached to the man's abdominal area. And it was so massive, not fat, just a really strong muscular body. I am sure that they belonged together. I could only see the shadow of the wolves as well, but it was scary nonetheless. I was so happy when I woke up, because I did not enjoy 1 second of that dream, that visit, whatever it was. A couple of days after I got home, I had a hard time falling asleep. That night, I turned around in my bed for so long, I thought I would never sleep that night. Finally, at some point, I managed to reach sweet slumber, but not for long. I woke up a couple of minutes later, but only to find myself in some sort of sleep paralysis. I heard of it a couple of times before, but I was sure that this was not just sleep paralysis. What made mine so different is what happened during the time I couldn't move. I laid there, unable to do anything, but I could see and hear and feel everything else, and unfortunately, it was not the nothingness of my dark room. At first, I noticed a sound, a breathing sound, not from a person, from an animal. Not from any animal. It was the breathing sound of a wolf. And the second thing I noticed was the wind that blew across my face. The wolf sniffed my face. I could feel his every breath running across my skin. My eyes were wide open, but I could only see the ceiling. No wolf. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, and even my breath was limited. But somehow I managed to clench a fist, raise my arm, and punch right above my face where the wolf's head was. As soon as I did that, it was over. When my arm flew over my head, the wolf was gone. The breathing was gone. The paralysis was gone. I sat up and looked around, but there was only my empty room. I was so terrified that I crawled under the blanket and pulled it up to my chin, even though it was a hot summer night. But I couldn't feel comfortable in any other way that night. After that incident, I never felt the wolf in my room again. The man came to visit me a few more times, but he did nothing but stand and watch from my bookshelves as usual. I left to become an au pair for a year that September, and was curious if the ghost would follow me, but he didn't. From time to time I had to think about him, when I thought about going back home, and if he'd still be there. Ever since I'm back, I haven't felt he's with me. It's like he never existed, besides the memories I have. Now I know that it was stupid to tell the ghost that he could hurt me if he wanted to. I've heard stories where ghosts push, punch, and scratch people. Even a story where a ghost killed someone, and I believe them all. But I just had to know if he wanted to hurt me as well. But I know that it was one of the most stupid ideas to try and punch a wolf. You don't punch ghosts. But in that moment, I was so afraid. It was like a panic mechanism. Maybe it all was in my head. Maybe there never was anyone in my room. Maybe I had imagined it or become paranoid because of all the creepy stories I listened to. But if so, why didn't it happen before? Why doesn't it happen now? And the sleep paralysis? If it was what I thought, or I was kept being possessed by the wolf ghost, this was not the usual sleep paralysis. At least I think so. Do you feel anything like that when you're in sleep paralysis? This has never happened to me before or ever again, only at the time where the animal was there and sniffed my face. I wish I knew what the ghost and his pet wolf wanted, what they tried to do, or if there was anything that I could have done to help them. Maybe they didn't know that they were dead and wandered around the earth without any chance of going onto the other side. I wish I knew. If anyone has ever experienced something like that, what would you do in a situation like this? And to the man and his wolf, I hope we never meet again. When I was around 5 or 6 years old, my father got a really good job offer in Florida. My parents rented a house and intended to wait a year or so before buying one, just until things settled down. The house they chose was okay. Nothing remarkable about it, especially to a 6-year-old. Less than a month after we moved in, strange things started happening. My brother was really into jigsaw puzzles, big ones with hundreds of pieces, and he would put them together on the floor of our bedroom. They started getting messed up in the middle of the night, and naturally, he blamed me. Things would also go missing, then turn up in strange places. My toys would show up on his desk. His stuff would end up under my bed. Of course, I was blamed for that as well. Not long after that, I started to have really bad nightmares. My parents called them nightmares, but I would insist that I wasn't asleep when it happened. But of course, they did not believe me. I would be laying in my bed, waiting to fall asleep, and a young woman would appear. She was Caucasian, with tangled, wavy black hair, and she was wearing a white cotton nightgown with little volatile flowers on it. She seemed to be hovering a few feet over the ground, swaying. Her body was straight, but her head was cocked to the side and bent sharply down. She didn't just appear in front of me though. It was more like when something had always been there, but you had never noticed it before. Like it was outside of your peripheral vision at first. It's a bit hard to explain. She never made a sound. Everything seemed totally silent. She would just stare at me with a look of pure rage on her face. I've pissed off my share of people in my time, but I've never seen a look like that before or since. It was like she was directing every ounce of hatred a person could have in their entire life at me, all at once. While she was staring at me, I couldn't move. I couldn't look away. I couldn't even breathe. Nothing. She would stay there for a while. I'm not sure how long, but it felt like forever. And then she would leave the same way she came. Not so much vanishing, but I would seem to lose sight of her, though I was looking right at her, and she would be gone. Once I had control of my body again, I would become hysterical and wake up everyone in the house. After several of these nightmares, my mother took me to a therapist who said I was having night terrors. After several weeks of this, I heard my parents having a heated discussion in their bedroom, and the next day, my parents said that we were moving into another house. My mother claimed it was closer to both of their jobs. Within a week, we were in a new house. After moving out of that house, I never had another episode, though I still to this day have the occasional nightmare about it. Nothing like what I was experiencing then, more like a memory of it. My brother's puzzles and everything went back to normal too. It wasn't until many years later, after I had gone away to college and was back home visiting my mother, that she told me the real reason we had moved. My mother was talking to one of our neighbours about my night terrors, and she said that another family with a little girl rented the place a few years before us, and she had the exact same night terrors, right down to the nightgown with the pretty purple flowers. The neighbour also mentioned that no one seemed to stay in that house for more than a year. My mother thought it was too much of a coincidence, so she started asking around, and found out from an older couple in the neighbourhood that a young woman had killed herself in the house in the early 60s, and my experience took place in the mid-80s. My mother went to the library and looked through the microfiche and found the news articles. It turns out that the girl in her early 20s had mental health issues and was being cared for by her parents, and had got into that room in the middle of the night and hung herself by the ceiling light. It turns out she wasn't hovering off the ground, but rather hanging there. I never got to see the picture they had of the girl in the paper, but my mum said she had long, wavy black hair. I'll never forget her eyes burning through me, and her face distorted in silent rage. I spent most of my younger life wondering what I had done to make her so angry. I now realize that it was most likely nothing to do with me. I hope she's found her peace. When I saw my first shadow person, I was 6, and if my cousin Adrian hadn't witnessed it himself, I don't think anyone would have believed me. I lived out on a ranch, and my cousin lived just down the country road. We often spent the night at each other's house, since we lived far out of town, and our school friends really couldn't visit. He and I were always together. Well, one Friday night he stayed over. We had made a plan to get up super early for Saturday morning cartoons. At the time, I lived in a single-wide trailer home, 2-bedroom, so I shared a room with my older brother and older sister. My sister and I had bunk beds, and my brother had his own. The room was a straight shot down the hallway at the end of the trailer. The way the bunks were set, when the door was open, you could see the living room couch at the other end of the hall, where there was a breakfast bar that divided it from the kitchen. That night, we slept on the bottom bunk, which was my bed. My sister had tops. Well, we had gotten up early, as planned, and were ready to binge on Frosted Flakes and cartoons. Only, we had gotten up too early. Where I lived, they started at 6 a.m. Well, the good ones did. Upon figuring this, we decided to just lay there. We joke around, laughing, and try not to wake up the angry teenager up top. When we turn on our stomachs to see what time it was on the kitchen wall clock, there it was. It was a tall, dark figure. It looked like a man. We knew it wasn't my parents. We clearly would have known if they'd have gotten up. Where it was standing behind the bar was our kitchen sink, and to me, it looked as if it was going through our dishes. I couldn't physically see him picking them up, but I just kind of knew, and it looked at them almost curiously, and then he'd set them down. This all happened in less than a minute. But you know how time almost slows down when the weird stuff happens? Adrian whispers to me, "Do you see that? What the heck is it?" "I don't know," I whisper back. And it's like it heard us, because as soon as I let those words out, the thing stopped what it was doing and looked straight at us. He had no face. I mean, he was a shadow, but I could see his sense of surprise, and he stared at us, and we stared at him. We just faced each other down the hallway. Then he just suddenly ducks down and disappears, almost as if we scared him. We stay there in shock, trying to process what we had just seen. We finally work up the courage to get up and check the kitchen after a long round of, "No, you first," back and forth. We walked down the hall, huddled together, to make our way to the kitchen where it stood. There was nothing there. To this day, you can put my cousin and I in a separate room, and he'll tell you the same. The only difference is when he looked at it, he saw red eyes. I did not. This wouldn't be the last time I would see the shadow people. Years later, I'd see them again. So, years later, I had gotten into a fight with my significant other at the time, a real abusive twit. And for the 100th time, I left back home for my parents' ranch about 60 miles away. I got there close to 6 when the sun was setting. Well, while there, I went to my old room and rolled a joint, and sat down, cried, and smoked. When I went to exhale the smoke out of my window, I saw a man of shadow leaning against the tree outside, a few feet away from my window. He had what looked like a cowboy hat, and was just leaning there looking towards my window. I thought it was someone who was looking for my brother, since his house was right next door to my parents. I went to ask my mum, who was waiting outside for Gabriel, my brother, and she looked out towards the trees where I told her, and she said that she saw no one standing there. Only there was. I could still see him looking at us. I said, "Okay," and went back to my room. I looked outside again, and now there were 2 more. One was in the tree on a low-hanging branch, and the other was sitting next to the man in the hat. That one started to motion his hands, as if to say, "Come outside." It's dark now. Only the porch light lit up the outside. I moved my head back and forth to say no and sit on the floor. Then, that's when I started hearing whispers. I kept hearing, "She's not coming," and "She's down there," and a low, low drum of music, like it was being played out in the far distance. Then the whispers got closer, and they started coming from the adjacent window, and they were saying, "Hey, hey, hey, Sally," and then someone giggling, "Sally." At one point, I thought it was my significant other, trying to come back to mess with me and take me back. So I get up and get on the bed and look out the window. There were 4 more shadows, all just there sitting outside my room under the tree, with the shadow hat man still there. They're talking amongst themselves and looking into my direction. I can't make out what they're saying, but I can see that there are at least 7. The hat man, the 3 sitting down around him, the 2 up in the tree, and 1 by the adjacent window. I ask them what they want and to please leave me alone. I close the curtains and sit on the floor. I'm not scared. I'm more bothered. I can hear them whispering my name and pleading for me to come out. After about an hour of hearing them, I get upset and finally tell them, "Okay, you want me to come out? Here I come." I get up and go to the kitchen and grab one of the biggest kitchen knives my mum has. I stand at the front door ready to attack or be attacked. I open the door and go outside, and they're gone. I walk out and ask them, "Where the hell'd you go? I'm here. You wanted me, so here I am." Just as I heard them again, they were this time down the dirt road, heading towards the dark, unlit part of the ranch, where the thicket of the brush and cacti met our main road to the entrance of our ranch. I started to follow the voices out towards that direction, kitchen knife in tow. It was about a football field lengths away, and when I snapped out of it, I got this strange, overwhelming feeling of doom and fear. If I kept following the voices, I was going to end up dead in the brush or by a wild animal, or something worse. I was in bare feet, shorts and a t-shirt, and I was walking to nowhere. When I snapped out of it, I found myself near the front gate of the ranch in total darkness. I was scared, so I walked back. So I kind of did a crab walk, walking sideways all the way home, looking all around just in case. The closer I got to the house, the further the voices stayed in the brush. I got home and sat in my room with the lights on all night, and just sat on the floor from the windows. I knew what I had seen, just like when I was little, and I haven't seen any since. I lived above a popular pub on a main street, which has been known to have a lot of weird stuff happen. For about 2 weeks, I was constantly being awoken at 4 a.m. That's weird, right? Weird enough that there was a point where I would wake up and know it was 4 a.m. Check phone, 3:58, 4:01. Anyway, my room was situated in a big L, with my bed being at the end of the room where the lower part of the L was, and the L faces out into the rest of the room. Along the longer portion of the room is a bunk bed where my roommates Beard and Drunk sleep. I decided I'm going to bed early that night. It's a health night for me. No drugs or alcohol before bed, just an early night's rest. Beard is asleep, and I awake to someone in the room. I wake up and sit a little to see the dark outline of a person standing full profile across the room staring at me. I sit up and strain my eyes a bit and ask, "Hey Drunk, you okay buddy? You need help getting up to the top bunk?" Drunk has been known to fall off the top bunk, or pass out on the floor or in the chair in the room. Drunk says nothing, and just eerily stares at me speechless. Weird enough. I figure it was just drunk, being, well, drunk. And he's so blacked out he's not responding to anything. I put on my glasses and just kind of freeze. Drunk? Dude, you okay? I ask again. Drunk walks over to the end of the bunk bed and sits down at the feet of Beard. Beard is sleeping. So naturally I call out to Drunk, "Hey man, don't wake up Beard, come on, let's go dude. I'll help you up to the top bunk." Beard has to be up at 5 AM, and it'd be shitty if he woke up because his other roommate passed out on top of him. I get up, turn on my phone flashlight, and walk across the room and reach out to Drunk. "Hey dude, let's..." No one's there. No one was there. No one is sitting at the end of the bunk bed. It's just me and Beard in the room. I've never noped the hell out so hard in my life. I turn on the lights and start yelling for Beard to get up. "Dude, did Drunk come home? I swear Drunk is home." Obviously Beard is like, "What the hell dude, no." Drunk came home much later in the night, and the outline of him compared to the figure I saw were different. But I know what the hell I saw. It makes everything about the situation even more messed up, since looking back at it, I had a full-blown conversation with something that was not even in the room apparently. After that, I totally believe in ghosts. Screw that noise, man. Spirits don't like to be messed with. From the ages of 10 to 13, I lived in what I like to call the devil/demon's home, or the playhouse. The neighborhood I lived in, I guess, correlated with it. I would see pitch black figures, either in my peripheral vision or directly in my line of sight. I remember 4 occurrences of the shadows being straight ahead of me. They were a man pointing a rifle from a deer to my friend, and I in a church field. A cat vanishing into thin air as he jumped off a fence, and a doll in the corner of my room, standing and staring at me while I was in bed. And a woman laying right next to me in the same hour as the doll. I was afraid of my closet, because in the ceiling, it had a square cut out that led to the attic. There was no other passage to it, except through that opening. The cutout wasn't perfectly fit, so I could see inside. I tend to investigate what I fear, because I want the relief of knowing that it could be explained, so I obviously stared up there a lot. Whenever I absolutely had to open my closet door. One time, I saw a red figure, exactly how you would imagine the devil or demon, horns, tail, and all, walk by the window that I could see through the crack. The window had sheer lavender curtains and dim sunlight shining through it. There was no window, and it wouldn't have made sense for there to be a window at all, since it was located in the middle of the house. It was like I was looking into a whole other world. My bedroom door shook back and forth in its frame, and the handle was being turned frantically. It was unlocked, so I knew it wasn't somebody trying to get in. It lasted around 30 seconds, so I had enough time to stare at it from my bed. I called out, "Hello?" and walked up to it and waited for it to stop. The wood floor creaked when anyone about walked, but there was no noise before and after my door shook. The only people home were my brother and I. His room was right across from mine, so I thought he might be playing a trick on me. I went in to ask, but he said no, and he wasn't lying to me. I could always tell when he'd lie to me, because he couldn't help but smile. This time he looked at me with hostility, like I was crazy. Have you ever felt that a dead relative is watching over you? I felt like it the whole time I was in the house, but rarely when I was anywhere else. During my grandma's funeral, I didn't feel like she was gone. I felt confused as to why everyone was crying as they walked over to see her. When it was my turn, I greeted her and observed her for however long everybody else was doing for, then walked off. No crying, nothing. It's not that I couldn't understand death, but that I felt like whoever was dead was still with us, in the playhouse. I constantly felt like it. I was being watched over by my grandmother. Even if she couldn't do anything to protect me from my god-awful family, she was making sure that I was well. Even the animals showed signs that something was there watching us. They wouldn't become hostile. They would just stare at it. I related it to be my grandmother because she was the only relative to truly love me. I always had a weird feeling about the whole neighborhood, so this wasn't unusual. I also felt like there was a death curse or a plague. Every pet we ever had in that house, except for my Dashin, died early on and with no signs of illness beforehand. I was afraid to get an animal because I knew it was going to die mysteriously, like all the others within a year or so. Either it was a plague, or my brother is a true psychopath that likes to poison animals. I had a dream about it once, and that's what happened in it. When I think back to all these occurrences, I keep trying to think that I was hallucinating, since I read that being severely abused could do that to a person's mind. But when I think of any other house that I live in, while still being abused like hell, I never had any strange experiences. All my animals stayed alive except for my poor rat. The poor thing had a swollen purple tongue, and I couldn't figure out the cause of it. Thank God I'm not in that house anymore. It's made me paranoid to any house that I'd lived in after that. This happened around 2013. I was a kid attending elementary school at the time. My family wanted to paint my bedroom, so they moved my bed to an unused space in the living room. The living room is very open. The only 3 entrances there are these: the main door, the garage door, and the hallway to the kitchen. I don't know if I should count the door to my bedroom. Whatever. I stayed a couple of nights sleeping there. Of course, wide open space at night tended to scare me, but I grew calm through my time there. And then the shocking part came. At 7 a.m. I have to dress up for school. I sit on my bed, and there it is. A short silhouette, without a face nor details, standing in the middle of the living room. I can't make out any trait of it. I keep looking at it for half a minute, paralyzed in fear. I can then see a head and the rest of the body, but it was like an empty shell. Was it looking at me? Did it have its back turned towards me? All of those questions rushed through my mind. I finally broke down in fear and covered myself with my sheets, hoping that it would go away. My mother came in there about a half hour later, calming me down. I sat on my bed. I must have just confused the figure with something on a chair, I thought. But not. There wasn't a single thing in that room that I could have confused with a silhouette. For the next few years, I didn't see that figure. Weird things happened in my house every now and then. Like my brother suddenly started crying when approaching the back door, a toy car moving towards us as we entered the house, and a toy pistol going off in the middle of the night. In my dreams, I kept seeing him. I don't remember much about these dreams. I just remember two in particular. In the first nightmare, a lot of toys were moving on their own around the house as I entered my bedroom, and it was there, standing alongside my bed. So I ran to my parents' bedroom as I heard something following me, and I woke up after that. The last dream I had, I woke up in my parents' bed. My brother was sleeping next to me. I usually sleep with my mother and brother when my stepfather is not at home, and I walked to the kitchen to prepare something to eat. There he was, standing next to the goddamn table. I don't know what happened to me then, because I know that the normal me wouldn't do something like that. I ran to the figure and smashed his head to pieces against the table. It shattered like glass. As soon as I saw the glass shards, I woke up from the dream. That's the weird part. I woke up, and everything right after that was happening exactly like in the dream. What I did after leaving the bed and everything. I realized it and shut the door to the kitchen tight without looking inside. I was completely scared by what could have happened. The figure didn't appear again. I don't know what happened, but I have to admit sometimes I feel watched in my house. I hear my name from other rooms when I'm alone. The dishes making noise when I'm in the living room. And the worst is when I'm outside, in the streets, and I hear footsteps behind, but there's no one there. I don't know if I got paranoid after the strange things in my house, but what I saw was real, and I think whatever it is not done with me yet. I've been around ghosts and other paranormal things ever since I can remember. Not a day goes by that I don't see something, whether it be when I'm out and about or just relaxing at home. The first experience I had, I was too young to remember it, but many times over the next 30 years, my mum would relate the story to me, because it also left an impression of her as well. I was 3 years old in 1984, and I had been sick with a very bad flu for a week. I had been unable to eat very much and had a raging fever, and despite being taken to hospital, none of the doctors could really help me bring down my fever, save for antibiotics and to keep me well hydrated. It was late one night, around 1 to 2 a.m, when my mum relates to me several years later that she was awoken by someone pulling on the blankets on her sides of my parents' bed, and when she sat up, she saw me standing behind her. A curious expression on my face. Being really sick at the time, my mum immediately thought the worst for me, and pulled me into the bed with her through the rest of the night. After having a raging fever for the last few days, keeping me in bed, and getting up only under protest to use the bathroom during the day, my mum thought it was strange that I had suddenly gotten up of my own accord in the middle of the night, and made my way into her room and wake her up. Naturally, being a parent of a 3-year-old, she was very concerned for my sickness, and let me lie down beside her in her bed and sleep there for the rest of the night. Over the next 30 years, whenever she relates the story to her friends, she's always surprised at what I told her that night. When she had asked me what was wrong, being so young at the time, I can't remember any of the details myself, but my mum told me that I told her that I was sleeping in my bed, when suddenly I wake up, feeling like someone was in the room with me. I must have thought it was one of my parents, just quickly checking up on me. So when I called out, I got no reply from either of my parents, which would have been the case if one or both of them had been checking in on me. Instead, what I told my mum gave her chills for years to come. She told me to say that I had woken up to see a woman in her mid-70s with short brown/greying hair, wearing a full-length blue dress with a white collar blouse, standing over my bed, a frown on her face. She leant down close to me and rested one of her hands on my burning hot forehead and spoke some words that I couldn't properly hear, like she was whispering or muttering under her breath. It was not even a minute before the woman removed her hand from my forehead, a smile replacing the frown that she had previously worn, and then started to lean back, straightening up. As she did, she started to disappear, not in a wisp of smoke, but gradually her whole body at once, until she was completely gone. I was completely alone in my room once again. It was at this point I had climbed out of my bed and walked down the hall to my parents' room, where I had woken up my mum. My mum asked me to describe the woman I'd seen, and I told her about the short brown grey hair, the long blue dress with a white collar blouse, and my mum then put her hand against my forehead and drew back in surprise, finding that my head no longer felt hot from the fever. The next morning, my fever had completely vanished, and my mum pulled out a photo album, opened to a picture of an old woman with short brown grey hair. I had described my great-grandmother, who had passed away some 11-odd years earlier. She I had never even known about, but Mum said she had probably come to check up on me because she was worried about how sick I had been and that no medicine had helped me get better. Mum also told me a few strange things about my great-grandmother, like how she had once booked a passage on an ocean liner that was sailing out of England to America, but pulled out only hours before checking herself on because of a dream the previous night about the same boat hitting an iceberg and sinking, and that because of her last-minute decision not to go, it was too late to have her luggage removed. Luggage that went down with the same ship she was meant to be on, and which now lied at the bottom of the Atlantic. That ship was the Titanic. Now, thinking back on some of the stories I've heard about her, it makes me wonder if I now share some kind of paranormal abilities like she did when she was alive. To this day, over 30 years later, I always keep that photo my mum showed me of my great-grandmother nearby, and every time I look at that photo, I always silently thank her for her concern and devotion to keep a close eye on me from beyond this world. There were 5 of us living in this house. One day I got home, and at that time of day when I got home, no one would be there except for me. So I had a computer downstairs that I sat with my back directly towards the chair. All the bedrooms were upstairs, and only one of our roommates had a TV in their room. So I'm sitting there with my headphones on, and I take them off, and I hear some talking. So I figure that my roommate has left his TV on, and I hadn't heard it when I got home. So I start walking towards the stairs, and I'm going to turn it off, because we were all crazy about electricity bills. And I hear like springs on a bed, as if someone is either getting on or off the bed. So I assume, oh okay, my roommate stayed home today, or was either late for work or something like that. He generally parked in the garage, and I hadn't gone out there since I went through the front door, so I wouldn't have known if he was there or not. So anyway, the bed springs and the TV sound stops, and I sit down at the bottom of the stairs and assume he's about to walk out of his room. And I'm waiting for a while, and eventually I start feeling weird about the situation. So I walk out to the backyard because it was where everyone would hang out. So if he went down the stairs, he would walk outside and say bye. I also had another roommate who would always get home around this time as well. So I was hoping he would come home, because at this point I'm feeling anxious about the whole thing. We had a glass sliding door and a screen door as well, and we always kept the glass one open, and everyone would just go through the slider door. So I'm in the backyard, as my back is faced away from the door, and I hear as if my roommate was about to walk out the screen door. The screen door made the sound like something had at least touched it, and I felt immediate relief, thinking, cool, my roommate's home. I can't wait to tell him about this stuff. I turn around and no one comes out the screen door. So I look inside and no one's there. So now I'm like, what? So I go around the house and through the side door into the garage to see if his car was even there. And maybe he opened the door into the house from the garage, and the wind or something pulled the screen door and it made the noise. But there were no cars inside. So I opened the garage door, and no one's home. I'm the only person here. Nothing happened after that, but I called my girlfriend at the time, who lived there at the same time, just to see what time she'd be coming home, because there was no way I was going to walk out there alone. I stayed in the garage sweeping for 3 hours, even when it got dark outside. I was not down. So one day at the same house, after the weird door lock morning, perhaps a few weeks later, I'm driving home and my girlfriend is calling me, but I'm literally right around the corner, so I didn't answer it. Then she immediately calls me again. So now I'm thinking that maybe she wanted me to pick something up before I got home. So I answer it, and I'm about 1 street away at this point. So I just start speaking and I'm like, hey, I'm right around the corner. And my girlfriend is screaming, crying, and it sounds like she's running. I'm like, what the hell is going on? And she's just screaming my cat's name. So I think, oh God, did my cat run away? Or did she get hit by a car? As I turn the corner, I watch my girlfriend running outside with my cat in her hands and phone in the other, running into the street. She tells me the story once she calms down, and says that she was in our bathroom. We always kept one of the doors slid open, covering the other, because we also had our dresser inside there too. So it was kind of like a mini room. So she's sitting on the toilet which faces that closet, and says that all of a sudden the closet started shaking violently, and she thought that we were having an earthquake. We live in California, so it's not unheard of. Once she realized that nothing else was really shaking, she figured it was our cat that might be messing around in the closet, and once she finished her business, she walked into the closet to grab the cat, but the cat wasn't there. At this point, with how violently the slider doors had shaken, there was no real explanation, rather than maybe an earthquake. She ran out the room and downstairs, found the cat downstairs and grabbed her, and ran outside of the house. We looked up for days to see if there were any earthquake reports remotely near us, but nothing. I checked USGS for hours after the event, and nothing ever came up. I get sleep paralysis, and I'm used to it. Sometimes I can even turn it into a hyper-real lucid paradise. I'm an odd duck in general though, and I usually will sleep between 12 and 4. My wife talks in her sleep, and frequently has night terrors, so we're fun. So the day before, I marathoned this show, Paranormal Survivor. People share their obscenely true stories of hauntings alongside a dramatization. It's mostly corny, but it can be pleasantly creepy. I went to bed with a head full of ghost stories. I dreamt something scary in a forgettable way, apparently, and woke up to my wife thrashing next to me. I was on my back. I couldn't move as she was butting her elbows against my right side, groaning and muttering something. I looked around and figured it was another episode. No big deal, but it did feel a little creepy. Then the cat jumped onto my chest, and right then she rolled onto my face and shouted, "Murder!" This was much lower than her voice goes. Much, much lower. The cat's purring into my chest. Then the closet by my left hand opens up. Out walks a man, tall enough that he had to stoop to make it through the room. His arms dragged on the floor, and he was pitch black in the dim bedroom. We have only a nightlight for bathroom trips, and a window above the head of the bed. He walked down my side of the bed and stopped at my feet. I had seen shadow figures before, but never one with a hat. I had heard of the Hat Man, but he was always accompanied by others, and this one was alone. So I was confused, nervous for a scary dream, but also was a little curious. Murder. He turned to face me, lifting his left arm, and the wall behind him opened up in a vortex of fire that lit up the room. I saw his face plainly for a moment. I remember snarling teeth and a kind of winky expression. His skin was grey and kind of slattered like peeling bark. After opening it, he stood back to the side. Only his teeth and eyes glinted. He spoke, but I couldn't understand. I was terrified. I did everything I could to get out of there and wake myself up. As I fought to sit up, I felt my shoulders rise, but they started tingling like crazy. The man rushed to my side, and in fear, I slammed back down. He was clearly disappointed, and I realized I must have been leaving my body. I'd had a few other nights where my dreams started from waking to standing over myself to whatever I could imagine, and there was always a moment of terrifying static sensation getting up for those. After that, I started praying. I remember I woke up a few more times that night, but this is the only one I remember vividly. I regularly have dreams with multiple moments where I'm waking up. The next day, I felt creeped out, but not enough that I wasn't going to finish the series. I started the next episode of Paranormal Survivor, and it was another demon that growled murder at the inhabitants of a house somewhere. That's when I decided to smudge the house. My wife told me that she also has extremely regular nightmares, so she wasn't impressed. After watching the next episode though, I told her we had to do something. I've had many other lucid dreams / experiences, but never one with a real-life follow-up. I will say that only in this dream, and one other that I've had, did I get the sensation of heat. In the other one, I got stabbed and felt hot, sickly blood in my hand. Unsettling to say the least, since I'd never had that in my dreams before. No idea at all about the items. I actually own my house, so I asked my buddy, who had been in that room previously, and he acted like I was nuts. My house also turns 100 this year. I live in a modest 2-bedroom right behind a gigantic mansion, which used to be a country club. So really, the history is anyone's guess. One night when I was 10, I was asleep in bed and was woken up by my bedroom door opening, then someone sitting on my bed. I felt the graze on my leg, and then the bed sink as they sat. Thinking it was my mum having to tell me something, I opened my eyes only to see a pale, eyeless, just black, empty sockets boy, who was seeming to be my age, sitting at the foot of my bed, with his legs crossed, staring at me, or facing in my direction since he had no eyes. He then reached his hand towards me, and he was holding what looked like a little black box. I was freaked out, but as I reached to grab it, he hesitantly pulled back. I reached out further for it, and said, "Give it." As I did so, I blinked, and by the time I reopened my eyes, he was gone. The spot of the bed where he was sitting lifted back into place, but the imprint of someone sitting there was still present. I told my mum in the morning, and she was slightly freaked out, but assured me I was just dreaming. Fast forward 5 years. I had my girlfriend over to do homework. After homework, she took a nap while she waited for her parents to pick her up. When they arrived, I tried waking her to let her know. I nudged her, and she opened her eyes so suddenly, already looking in the direction of the corner of the room, where the walls meet the ceiling. She lifted her finger and pointed, and as fast as she woke, she fell asleep again. I attempted to wake her up, and she came to full consciousness, and I asked her what the hell that was about, and she explained what she just did. "Oh, I thought I was dreaming, but up on the wall I saw a little boy with no eyes, just there in a Spider-Man pose staring at me." That's when I freaked out, and told her the story, for the first time, of when I saw the same kid. Fast forward another 5 years, still with the same girlfriend, and by this time we had a 2-year-old daughter. We were living in my old bedroom at my parents' house, and my daughter would wake up at the very same time every night and start talking. For a while we thought it was a normal baby thing, until I noticed it was almost the same conversation every night. I playfully asked her one night who she was talking to. She responded, "A little boy. He talks to me. He's nice. He's lost his mummy." I told my mum what happened the next morning, and before I got to tell her what I thought, she said, "I remember when that happened to you, then your girlfriend. I have no idea what that is." By then, neither my girlfriend or I have seen the little boy after our first encounter, but my daughter continued her nightly conversations until we got a place of our own later that year. These events happened 4 years ago. I'll start off by saying my name is Alan, and my best friend's name is Matt. Matt and I had been friends for 7 years at this point. Matt's dad lets us usually do whatever we wanted. I normally went to Matt's house and partied every Friday night. We were in our early 20s, in a shithole town in southern Tennessee. So what better things were there to do besides getting wrecked? The older Matt and I got, the more we realized we loved paranormal investigation shows. We shared experiences we had as children. The more we talked, the more we built up our egos, as if we didn't want to be scared of anything as a future paranormal investigator. Matt's family moved across town, and I spent the day/evening helping them move. It was late spring and early summer at the time, so it was hot enough for all-night porch sitting. One evening we decided to have a bonfire and drink a beer. Around 8 p.m, we put the fire out and Matt's dad left. Being big guys, we had gotten hot and taken our shirts off, and we were watching TV in the living room. We heard Matt's dog Sparky barking towards the back of the house. Sparky would bark at anything, so we were like, whatever. The barking, however, got louder and more fear-based. We found Sparky in the bathroom barking at the toilet. "Dumb dog," Matt said. Matt went back into the living room, and I followed. The barking continued to get louder, with anger and fear. I asked Matt, "What the hell is he barking at?" We found him a few feet off the back door, snarling at the door. We got a bit concerned and thought maybe this was something. I asked Matt if his dad knew anything about the house, and he said no. But I had brought my camera, so he cracked a smile and we decided to investigate. We went through the house, doing everything we'd seen on the ghost TV shows. We got nothing. I said Sparky was barking at the back, and out we went. We took off our belts and held them like they would be some kind of defensive weapon. When presented with a real-life situation, those egos had shriveled up like raisins. I told him to take the back corner of the house and cover me as I ran to the unattached sheds behind the wall. It was about midnight, and the small backyard connected to the woods, so it was pitch black dark. I had gotten ballsy, so I started imitating that famous ghost hunter Zach. "If you have any balls, show yourself," I shouted, then proceeded to say, "Don't be a pussy." No sooner had the words left my lips, I felt a presence come up on me. It hit me with such a force, it was hard enough to knock over my 6'4", 300-pound self. At this point, Matt had already taken off running. I jumped up and looked behind me, and saw the outline of a dark entity at least my height, with glowing yellow eyes, looking at me out of the tree line. I was frozen as we made eye contact. It was as if it were trying to eat me through my eyes. I snapped out of the frozen state when I heard Matt shout to run. I hopped onto my feet as it glided towards me and ran for the front door. I rounded the front porch so fast I had to grab the porch support post to spin up to the porch. We hid in Matt's room until his dad returned home. We told him what happened, and he went on to tell us about the previous tenants in the land. He had recently found out that not only did the guy that lived here before die in the back room, but also practice weird rituals on the land. We made it through that night, but never again did I feel comfortable there. It was as if I were being watched, like a hunter watching its prey. They moved again not long afterwards, and I always try and avoid the road which that house is on. When I was about 8 years old, I was visiting my grandpa, and a lot of creepy things started to happen to me during my visit. Just to give you a little background, my grandpa owns a restaurant, and there is a basement and an apartment above the restaurant. Now that I'm 28, my family has told me the place is haunted, but they never told me because they didn't want to scare me. So for the longest time I kept having flashbacks of these childhood memories, and it makes me feel extremely anxious and stressed to the point where I can't eat for days. Hopefully you guys can put me to ease. So during my visit to the restaurant, I got really busy, and my grandpa told me to go upstairs. But when I went upstairs and opened the door to my grandpa's side of the apartment, the TV was on and I was sitting on the floor playing with my toys. I just stood in the doorway in shock to see myself as it asked me if I wanted to play. I freaked out and ran down the stairs and refused to go back upstairs. I told one of the waitresses what happened, and she went upstairs with me, and the TV was off, and my toys were in the toy bin. I know what I saw was real, and there's no way I imagined it, because later that night, when I had completely forgot what happened, this dark figure chased me down the hall after I got out the shower. I can clearly remember seeing this dark figure in the corner, watching me, and when I walked out of the bathroom, it jolted towards me and I ran. I couldn't sleep that whole night, because I could feel like something was watching me, and I could hear whispering in the room. When the sun finally came up, I called my aunt and asked her to pick me up, because I couldn't stay at my grandpa's. I guess when I did that, I pissed whatever that thing was, because it locked me in the living room, and the TV turned on, and the channels kept on changing. I kept trying to open the door, and I just screamed for help. When my grandpa opened the door, he asked me why I was screaming. "The customers can hear you," he said. After I explained to him what happened, he told me that it was impossible since the door was unlocked, and the door can only be locked from the inside. More things happened to me when I was 16, but these memories are the ones I can't forget. I refuse to go back to my grandpa's apartment or basement, or talk about what has happened with the family. So I was over at my friend's house one night, when my other friend Patrick told us to come upstairs because Sienna wanted us to. We were downstairs in the garage, and Patrick had come up from Brooke's room, where Patrick and Sienna had been. Patrick stated that Sienna was sitting in the corner with her hair in front of her face, and face down, and she wouldn't want to come and talk, and Patrick told us she was acting very creepy. We were talking for a bit, and then Sienna came down to try and leave the house immediately. I told her to come upstairs and talk with me and Brooke. As soon as we entered Brooke's room, it was very cold inside. Brooke said, "It's so cold in here. Is there a ghost?" And we laughed it off. We cheered Sienna up after talking for a bit. Then Brooke left to take Patrick home. 2 minutes after Brooke left, I went to fill up Sienna's glass with water, and I left the room and walked past the laundry room, and what I saw scared me to death. I have never felt this sudden coldness run through my body before. I ran back into Brooke's room, and Sienna got scared from the look on my face. She said my face was super pale, and she had never seen me so scared ever. She was so concerned with what happened, until I told her, and she believes me 100%, because she saw the looks and paleness on my face. I immediately called Brooke and told her what happened. She told me she and her brother have seen a white lady in her laundry room pretty commonly, but just try to ignore it. They only see it during the night time. Patrick also believed me. It was his first night at the house, and he said some weird stuff was going on with Sienna, and Patrick was stunned about what I said, and wouldn't stop talking about it the whole ride home back with Brooke. I will never forget what I saw, and as of now, 100% believe in spirits and ghosts. It was about a 6-foot-tall woman, although I only saw the abdomen. Everything else above was greyish and white hair, black mouth, and the eyes were white, but looked like they were wearing eyeshadow. It was next to the hoodies hanging up by the wall across from the washer and dryer. This also matched the same place that Brooke and her brother kept spotting this spirit/ghost. Keep in mind, I matched the exact description and location of what Brooke and her brother saw without even knowing prior, so they believed me right away. Brooke came back to drop me home, and when Brooke and Sienna went back to her room, Brooke's room was nowhere near as cold, and the temperature got colder outside. This is what they told me. It was the only room where the temperature difference was noticed. What I think? Sienna being sad caused the spirit/ghost to feed off her sadness in Brooke's room, which made it very cold. Sienna was not acting normal ever since she started to feel sad, and again, even Patrick stated that she looked like a demon from a movie. When he entered the garage to tell us that Sienna wanted me and Brooke to come upstairs to talk. This house was built in 2004 and has a new owner every year up until 2009. Brooke's dad has been the owner of the house since then, and her dad regularly sees what I saw. I talked to Brooke some more, and she told me her stepmom is always in the laundry room for some weird reason, even when she's not doing laundry. The day after this happened, Sienna became very sick and began puking. She said that she would try to wait out her sickness and see if she got better. This is honestly really scaring me, as there's no real reason why she should have gotten sick this fast. In my childhood home, I would often hear touch typing coming from the computer downstairs in the early mornings. I didn't think much of it at first. My parents worked from home, and it wouldn't be uncommon for them to wake up in the morning and hear my mother typing away furiously at the computer. One day, I got up and called out to my mum, assuming she was down there working, as I could hear typing. No answer. No one was down there. I was sure I heard typing. This began happening regularly. I figured I was so used to hearing typing from downstairs that I was hearing things that weren't there. So I didn't mention anything to anyone, figuring I was going a bit crazy. This happened on and off over a period of 6 months. The sound of fast typing and fast, furious clicking of a mouse, as if someone was frustrated. One morning, I was eating my breakfast when I heard my mum at the top of the stairs call out to me, "You're not down on the computer already, are you?" I froze and ran out to her. I was amazed she'd heard it too. She was convinced she could hear me typing. Yet, no one was down there. I told her about all the times I'd been hearing it, and then my sister opened up about hearing it regularly too, when no one was down there. It wasn't crazy at all. I set out to try and catch whatever was causing it, and try to discover a rational explanation for it. I'd sprint out of my bedroom to the top of the stairs where I was able to look down into the room to see if anyone was at the computer. No such luck. Every time I got there, it stopped. I think it went on for a couple of years, and we learned to just kind of live with it, as it wasn't every day. I was down there once again, when the ceiling light globe in the center of the room began flashing very fast, strobe-like. It then exploded, and glass went shattering across the room. I was lucky I ran out of the room when it started happening, because I was scared. The whole mysterious type thing, you know. If I hadn't ran, I would have been hit with bits of light bulb. Around the same time, I was on the computer at home by myself, when something happened that resulted in me never being alone in that room again. I felt and heard this really sharp intake of breath directly behind my right ear. I've never run so fast in my life, and was hesitant going into that room ever again. Prior to that, the whole typing thing had just been something weird and a bit spooky, not scary. It still makes my heart race when I think about it today. I've never really encountered anything like this before or since all of these events. I don't particularly believe in ghosts either, but I'm open to the possibility that there are things in science that we don't have a proper explanation for yet. I believe in the paranormal, aliens, and everything else that might exist out there. I've seen a lot when I was younger, and I'm 22 now. This happened in June of this year, the 7th to be exact. I'm writing about it now because it's been on my mind since then, and I wanted to see if anyone else has experienced anything similar. So I was listening to my music, minding my own business, and then I needed a cigarette. It was around 10 p.m. Well, I went outside with no phone or anything. I went to go sit down, and before I sat, I saw this weird blue glowing light out in the distance. Well, beyond that blue glowing light, I saw a figure of a person. A black dark figure standing behind this blue glowing light. At first, I really thought somebody was in my yard holding a flashlight or something. But I live in a very isolated area, away from main roads and stores. If anyone is wondering what area, it's Eastern Connecticut. There's barely any people or cars, and there's no way somebody would just be standing there randomly in my yard at 10 p.m. This is the first and last time since that I've seen this thing. To add to the creepiness, I live on a farm. So the way I was looking out into the distance, there aren't any roads or anything. After that, I saw it back up, as if it were walking the opposite way, and the blue light disappeared with it. Okay, at this point I was like, nope, and I ran back inside. Well, I was trying to close the door, and I took another look back just out of curiosity, and then I saw a red light, like a single red floating light that was like medium size, which was near the window to my porch. For one, there was nothing reflective outside, no cars in the driveway, and so I was the only one home. I'm seriously wondering what the hell I'd seen. At the time I was so scared that I immediately called my father, who was busy and couldn't talk. But I begged him to come over after explaining this to him. He told me to relax, but it was too difficult for him to just sit there and relax. I then called my brother and was experiencing a very intense panic attack as I was telling him what had happened. I was sweating, my throat felt like it was closing up. I was dizzy and breathing very fast and heavy, and I felt like I couldn't move off my couch. I just sat completely still. I was afraid to move, or even glance over at the window. Whatever I saw really frightened me. That was the first time I ever really freaked out from seeing something like that. My whole family and I have seen and experienced a lot of things, but for some reason, this time I reacted far worse than any other of the times that I've seen something. If anybody has any questions, feel free to ask. Story by Lisa Barney. When I was 3 or 4, my grandmother passed away, and soon after, all my extended family flew into town to have the funeral. A week after the funeral, some relatives were still in town, including my uncle and his family. My grandmother wanted us to sell the house after she passed, so my family did just that. It was hectic, because we were trying to pack everything up. Meanwhile, everyone still had to go to work and school. On one of the days that we had to pack up the house, my parents both had work. My older cousins had school, and my uncles and aunts had jobs and other stuff. However, my uncle, my grandma's oldest son, was able to watch me a couple of hours, so he did. According to him, I asked him to go into the bathroom while he was watching TV. The closest bathroom was in my grandparents' old room, so I went there. When I came back, I asked my uncle who the nice lady was on the bed. He kinda played along with it, because he thought it might have been an imaginary friend or something. He asked me questions about her to entertain me. I described her as a dark-haired, kinda white, and wearing a blue nightgown. When I said that, my uncle freaked out, because my grandmother always wore a light blue nightgown to sleep. After that, my uncle and I left the house and waited outside for my parents to return. My friend Janice and I we're at our other friend Gemma's apartment. As we are hanging out, Gemma proceeds to tell me and Janice about some weird shit that had been going on in her apartment. She said at night she heard footsteps, as though someone was walking around in her living room. But when she got up to check, there was no one there. She told us that sometimes things would not be where she'd left them, like they had been moved, and she knew she hadn't done it. She said she heard voices at times, and she shouldn't have been able to hear the neighbors or anyone, such as when she was in the shower. Now, Gemma had moved in by herself because her boyfriend had obligations in our hometown for a few months and wouldn't be able to relocate for another couple of weeks. So Gemma was in a new place all by herself for the first time, and that, coupled with the copious amounts of bud she smoked, made me think that she was tripping out and paranoid or something. Janice and I are trying to calm her down because she's getting kind of upset and desperate for us to believe her, and I'm in the process of telling her every rational explanation I come up with. Thin walls, she's hearing the neighbors come home late, and her imagination. And then the craziest shit happens that to this day, 9 years later, I can't explain. The couch we are sitting on is at least 7 feet from the entertainment center / bookshelf that is directly across from us and attached to a wall. The books on the shelf are tightly packed side to side with no gaps or loose sections. There are no open doors or windows, so no wind in the apartment. But yet, despite all of this, a notebook, your typical college-ruled, spiral-bound notebook, comes flipping out end over end and lands halfway in between us and the shelf it launched itself from. Gemma, Janice, and myself are all silent. We look at the notebook and then each other. Then the notebook. That thing flew. It didn't simply fall off the shelf, which would have been weird and unexplainable in itself. It launched on an upward and outward trajectory, like it had been flung. None of us really had anything to say. Janice and myself now had to admit that maybe Gemma had been experiencing some weird shit, and I had to seriously reevaluate a lot of my understanding of how shit works. My mother has always been a nurse, and throughout our childhood, she would always tell my sister and I the stories of what she had encountered. Probably the one that stuck with me the most was about the Shadow Man. She told us that there'd be people at the hospital who'd come in and wouldn't come out, and that before someone would die, it wouldn't be uncommon to see a lonesome shadow drifting through the halls, lingering outside of rooms, until the person that it had come to take passed away. She was sure that this was the Angel of Death, or Grim Reaper, so to speak. When she first saw it, she thought she was losing her mind, and came home and told my dad, who said that it was probably real, and convinced her to speak up about it to fellow members of staff. The next day, she sheepishly spoke to a colleague of hers and said, "Did you see that thing yesterday?" She instantly clocked what my mother was talking about. "Oh, you mean Sandy." Sandy's what they called it? She went on to explain that Sandy is the name that they gave the thing that lurks in the shadows, and that it will always appear right before somebody dies. It's pretty interesting. Most of the nurses have seen it, and has made them all firm believers in something beyond. My mum was floored. Not only was she very happy that she wasn't going insane, but she was also now starting to see this thing more and more. There would be times where the creature would already be there, and a patient would come in, and it wasn't looking good. People would come and crowd this person, and doctors would talk about what percentage they had of survival, whether or not they would survive the night and stuff like that. But when she saw Sandy, she knew that their words were empty. Sandy had come for its prize, and it wasn't leaving that night and without that person. That happened every single time. She told me that not a person ever escaped Sandy. It was like it knew before it happened if it was your time to go. There were lots of occasions where people died way before their time, whether it be tragic accident or something completely different. It's always sad to see someone so young leave life. After about 6 years working at that hospital, it was really getting to my mum. That hospital had a pretty big turnover, so I'm not surprised that most of the people she started with had already left, save a few very senior members of the team. She gave in her notice and never looked back. A few freaky things happened at her new place of work, but nothing anywhere near as creepy as Sandy. I had just moved back to my hometown after attending an art school for 2 years. The only apartment I could find was a really dumpy loft over a warehouse for $50 a month. This was in 1971, way before these kinds of apartments were cool. This was cheap, even for back then, and though I wondered a bit about it, it wasn't totally out of the norm. It did have tall windows and skylights, so it worked great for a studio. Since it was a loft with a big wide open space, with the bathroom being the only room, there were 2 other doors, one to the stairs down to the street, and the fire escape that had one of those fire alarms on it if you go out of it. The bathroom was like a box/cubicle, with a shower and sink and toilet. I had been living there for about a month, when one night I woke up and went to use the bathroom. The door had a small side lock on it, and I always locked it out of habit. Just as I was about to leave, I heard heavy footsteps walk up to the bathroom door, and I watched in horror as the doorknob turned and rattled, shaking the whole door. It was for the first time in my life where I was so scared that I actually felt my body go completely numb. I thought for sure that someone had gotten in, and I was now going to be killed. The lock was a little wimpy thing that a granny could have broken into. The doorknob rattled several more times, and then something hit the door really hard. I then heard the footsteps walk away and go back down the stairs. I heard the door to the street open and close, and then silence. I think it took me nearly 30 minutes to get the courage to leave the little bathroom. When I finally did, I turned on every light in that place and went to inspect the door to the street. There were 3 locks on that door. 2 of them could only be locked from the inside, and those were locked. Nothing could have come in or gone out that way. I even checked the fire escape, but it was locked in a similar way. I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. As it turns out, that was the scariest thing to happen in that loft. After that, I would hear footsteps and doors open and close all the time. A few other not so scary things as well. That place convinced me, and quite a few other people, that these things were real. I ended up living there for 3 years and would have stayed longer, but the place got sold and the new owner wanted to move into the lofts themselves. They only lived there for 2 months before moving out. The cowards. A few years back, I was living with my boyfriend and his sister in a cottage built before the Civil War. We had a few strange things happen over the span of about a year and a half that we were there. At first, I thought they were both messing with me. They'd mentioned things falling over at random, little things that I didn't think much about. Then I started noticing things that I could not explain. Our small kitchen was by the back door, and we had a countertop with our cutlery in a drawer that, when opened, would block most of the entrance into the kitchen. It was one of these drawers that closed magnetically and didn't have a handle or knob. We would go back outside to smoke, and when we came back in, the cutlery drawer would be completely open, blocking the entrance. It couldn't have snagged on someone's clothing, as it had to be pulled out quite firmly to open because of the magnets. I still didn't think much of it, and things continued to escalate. One evening, my boyfriend and I were out, and his sister called us to tell us that the cat food container, which was probably around 10 to 15 pounds when full, and stacked on top of another larger container, somehow toppled over while she and all the animals were in her room. Next, the bathtub filled itself up one morning. We would be sitting on the sofa watching TV, and a ball would suddenly roll across the floor from under a bed or in a corner, and the dogs would start playing with it and staring at certain spots in the room, as if someone was standing there. Then one night, I woke up to adjust the thermostat, which was directly across a small hallway from my bathroom. I glanced over, because someone was on the toilet with the lights out and the door open. I apologized, assuming it was my boyfriend's sister, when I realized this girl was much more petite and looked nothing like her. I glanced back and no one was there. I wasn't very sleepy or incoherent, because the heat had been keeping me up, so I do believe I actually saw someone. Regardless, she seemed to be friendly and played with our dogs. I was once playing in the basement during a thunderstorm. The lights were out, and we thought it would be funny to play hide and seek with flashlights. We were running around when I tripped over a toy and fell to my knees. I started laughing even harder, and started looking around only to see flickers of light and my cousin laughing in the distance. That's when I looked up. Across the hall, the bedroom lit up with lightning from this tiny window. I saw the black silhouette that resembled a man, and he turned his head to look at me. Naturally, I froze, and once I could feel my legs again, I let out a scream and ran out as fast as I could upstairs. No one believed me. After that, weird stuff started happening. The lights would flicker, the TV would start turning on and off, and I would come back to my bedroom to all the bed all messed up. It was terrifying. I'm so glad we moved out of there, but sometimes I would feel it. That feeling of being watched every time you close your eyes before bed. On Christmas Day, my great-grandmother was hospitalized due to an infection caused by her kidney dialysis. She went downhill from there and passed away in the morning of January 16th. To start the whole thing off, my grandfather had loaded a bunch of Johnny Reed onto his iPod for her to listen to while she was in the hospital. He did so, brought the iPod home the night before to charge it the night before she passed away. He was awoken at 7 a.m. to his iPod playing Dance With Me, her favourite song. They went to the hospital, and she passed 2 hours later. At Christmas Eve, we had a family gathering with all of her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. There are 4 great-grandchildren, and she has contacted 3 of us. The first was my little cousin Barry. He often has night terrors and runs into his parents' room crying. And 2 nights after she'd passed away, Barry walks into his parents' room and asks them, "What does see ya mean?" They explained and asked why. He responded with, "Grammy came to visit and said see ya." The second was my other little cousin, who lives on the other side of Canada, Madison. She wasn't yet told about her great-grandmother's passing away, but she had been telling her mother and father about a rainbow angel that she had been playing with. She does not scare her, but calms her. The third was me. 2 days ago during the funeral, I was sitting in the front row, about 10 minutes before it was going to start. As clear as day in my right ear, I heard her say, "Bye, honey," like she would always say when I was leaving her house. It was clear enough that it made me turn and look. It is personally relieving that she isn't going through the dialysis treatments anymore, as it caused her more suffering than anything else. But I will miss her more than anything. These events have just come as a surprise to me, because very few members of my family believe in paranormal things. In the house where I grew up, a few weird things happened. The first is that sometimes when I'd arrive from school and was home alone, I'd hear flute music. It was definitely not coming from one of the neighbours. First, I wouldn't hear it. Second, I didn't know or play any instrument. It used to spook me a bit, so I'd just go outside and play hockey until my mother and father came home. As the years went by, I thought nothing of it, until about 5 or 6 years, when talking to my sister about the house. She's 10 years older than me. And she told me, "Remember the house being creepy?" I asked her why, and she told me that every now and then when she was alone, she would hear a flute melody. Fun times. The second thing was when I'd go to my upstairs bedroom in that same house. The way it was made was just a stairway doing a U, leading to the small hallway about 12 feet. On the right side it was my parents' bedroom, and on the left, mine. Now that I explained the layout, you know how sometimes you go to open the light and it instantly dies? So it basically just flashes on and immediately turns off. Yeah, so when I went upstairs and opened the light, that would happen. In that brief moment when the light flashed, I swear I could see a figure sitting on the edge of my parents' bed facing the wall. It happened exactly 4 times in the 12 years I lived there. Plus, we moved my bedroom downstairs when I was 8, because my sister was moving out for college. The 4th time it happened I was 11, and that time the figure was standing by the bed facing me. My parents divorced a year later, and we moved out. Now, for what's concerning the flute melody, I have no idea what that could have been. In regards to the shape, I saw when the light flashed. I'm pretty sure it was an optical illusion due to the flash messing with my eyes. But still, it was creepy as hell. The following occurred about a year and a half ago. I had gotten out of the shower and stood in front of the mirror to do my usual routine. As I was brushing my hair, I glanced to the right end of the mirror. It's about 4 by 5 feet, and saw the reflection of a black shadow standing under the doorframe of my bedroom. I would guess it were about 5'7" in height. No features. I could clearly see it because it stood in front of the furniture that I would usually see, and the door, which was white, was slightly closed, so it's also easy for me to see the contrast. This was my first paranormal experience, so I was more curious and confused than scared. As seconds went by, I was wondering if it was just my imagination. I blinked, looked away, and even continued with my routine. But as I looked up again, it was still standing there. I thought it was my father, since he had walked in there earlier, but then I heard him talking to my mother in the kitchen. It couldn't have been my brother, since he went out with his friends, and that morning my sister had left to go back to college. I debated whether I should turn around and confront it, but the idea of the shadow still being there when I did got me thinking. What if I do confront it? Will it still be there? Would it do something to me? I stayed put and continued with my routine. About a minute later, it was gone, and I could once again see the furniture in my room. This was around the time my mother, sister and I would hear footsteps in the hall that connects our rooms. I've never had sleep paralysis before, but during this time, it happened twice to me. So I've been living in a house with paranormal activity on and off for about 4 years. The occasional footsteps, random things falling, sleep paralysis. But I guess Mr. Ghost has decided to level up. Mega Ghost. First, he tried to mimic my cat. It was summertime, so I decided to sleep in the spare bedroom in the basement, my brother's room, because it's colder there. Mind you, my cat never sleeps in my room overnight, and my door is always closed. While I was sleeping, I felt an animal jump on my bed and sleep right against my thigh like my cat usually does. I was scared, so I kept my eyes closed for a few minutes, and when I got the courage to turn on my lights, nothing was there. There was also, on one night, my brother was visiting from university, and he texted me asking why I was crying, as his bedroom is directly under mine. And it was only me, him, and my cousin at home. Our cousin was playing on the PS4, so it couldn't have been him. I told my brother that I wasn't crying, and he didn't believe me, saying that it sounded exactly like my cry the day prior. The day before I was sobbing, because of a reason I'd rather not get into, but I was over it within a few hours, and that it sounded like it was coming from my room. The third and most recent incident happened yesterday. My mum and dad left early in the morning to go for a day trip. My aunt woke up and heard my mum talking and laughing. My aunt assumed that my mum hadn't left yet, and that she was on the phone. My aunt knew that they were supposed to leave in the morning, and was curious as to why they were still here. When she realized that they had already left, she scheduled a prayer at the house ASAP. I've never necessarily felt threatened by any of these paranormal experiences, but I feel like mimicking family members is a little much. Does anyone have any similar stories or experiences? Is this a ward or a ghost? I fully believe my old house was haunted. It used to belong to my aunt's husband, whose family had lived in the same town for generations. The house was built sometime in the 1800s. It was actually pretty cool initially. Anyway, my mother used to be the principal of my high school, and so she would have to stay late all the time for basketball games and events and such, and I would have the whole house to myself. I would hear thumps and things moving, footsteps and noises upstairs almost every night, and my dog would absolutely lose her shit and refuse to go into certain rooms. Her fur would stand on end, and she would bark like crazy. Mind you, she was old as hell and very passive. I never heard her bark even at a human before. The radios would turn on constantly while I was home alone. Once I was upstairs, and it flipped on, blaring. Scared the shit out of me. So I yanked the cord out of the wall and ran downstairs, only for the radio in the kitchen to turn on full blast as I came in. I had to tell my mum, please stop unplugging my hairdryer, every morning, and she would staunchly stick by her claim that she hadn't even touched it. Finally, one weekend, my father came to visit, as my parents are divorced, and he slept downstairs in the spare room, where we had a couch and a big plush chair, plus a table and antique banjo up against the wall. I got freaked out in my own room, so one night I decided to go doze in my chair near my dad. I finally fell into a light sleep. My dad woke up as well, and he even asked me, "Did you hear that?" It was never anything as scary as some of the other stories, but I could never explain anything that happened at that house. I am now 33 years old, and this happened one summer when I was about 5 or 6. I can still picture the moments before and after this happened. That day stays really clearly in my head. I'm in the garden talking to my dad, who's putting burgers on the barbecue. He would give me my own tongs so that I could help. I needed to pee, and as I was walking towards the back door, he calls out to me and tells my stepmom he needs a couple of trays. As I pass the kitchen, I see her preparing the salad and pass on the request for my dad. I then walk through the living room, and my sister and brother are play fighting with each other on the sofa. I run up the stairs and open the bathroom door, but something is in the way, and it won't open fully. I peek my head around the door and see a man in a black suit and tie standing facing towards me, and I'm just staring in confusion before I blurt out, "Sorry," and close the door. I was mortified. I stood outside for a moment, not knowing what to do, and being a kid that was easily embarrassed by encounters like these, it took me a while to figure out what to do next. I went straight to my stepmom to confess walking in on the man in the bathroom, but she didn't know who I meant. I passed this on to my dad, and neither did he. They eventually checked for me, and no one was there. Being so young, I sort of shrugged it off, but I never forgot, because it never made sense. I think it stood out to me as a kid, because the man was wearing a full suit, and it was a hot day. And I also was old enough to know that men don't usually wear suits on a Saturday. I don't remember the details of his face. I remember he was a young man and had a soft expression when he made eye contact. He didn't appear to be doing anything before I walked in, just standing. My dad and stepmom didn't appear disturbed or worried on the day, and I remember feeling like no one believed me. I always ask my dad about it, but next time I see him, I'm going to see if my stepmom remembers. My dad said at the time that they thought it was a bit odd, but the kids say weird stuff sometimes. I would consider myself to be quite a rational person, and quite skeptical, but it's the physicality of the experience that gets to me. You can explain these sort of things as a hallucination, but I bumped into him and stared at him in the eyes, as clear as day.